Today, we're making Tieu Mi Kho, or sometimes just called Mi Kho. It's the dry version of Phnom Penh noodle soup, and it's made with egg noodles, filled with all kinds of different toppings like pork, shrimp, and quail eggs, and it's brought together with a sweet and savory soy sauce that coats every little bit of the noodles. It's one of my favorite Vietnamese dishes, and it's perfect for entertaining because of how customizable it is. So do me a favor and make sure you like, comment, share, and save this video. Alright y'all, remember to wash your hands. First we'll cook our pork butt and make the broth. In this version, the noodles are served dry with the broth on the side, but using this broth you could easily make the noodle soup version, so make sure you check out that video here. Now let's parboil 2 pounds of pork bones with 2 pounds of pork butt, and we want to let this cook for about 10 minutes to help remove some of its porky odor and impurities to make sure that we have a light and clean broth. And then I'll drain, rinse, and scrub with cold water to remove any scum attached to the pork. Then make sure you wash your pot too, and then fill it back up with water. Now while the water's coming up to a boil, we'll get the rest of our ingredients for the broth prepped. First, I have half a cup of dried shrimp that I'll rehydrate in some room temperature tap water for about 10 minutes. Then I have a medium daikon, which I'll peel and then just cut up into chunks. And the daikon will add a subtle sweetness to our broth. Now to our pot of water, we'll add in our parboiled pork neck bones and our pork butt. And if you like this recipe and you want to learn how to make more of your favorite Vietnamese and Asian dishes, make sure you subscribe and turn on your notifications to stay up to date on all my latest posts. We'll add in our daikon, a whole yellow onion, and you can choose to char the onion if you want, but for soups like hủ tiếu and bún bò Huế, where the broth is already complex, I personally don't think charring the aromatics makes a huge difference in the end results. Then we'll add in our rehydrated shrimp. And this is just a piece of dried squid, and we'll also add it to the pot. We'll bring this up to a boil, skim off any impurities, lower the heat, and we'll let this simmer covered for about an hour. Now, while our broth is simmering, we'll move on to prepping all of our toppings. First, we'll make our Tieu Mi, or fried pork fat. Now, this is partially frozen pork fat, and I like tossing this in the freezer for a couple hours before I cut it to help firm up the fat and make it easier to cut. And we'll just cut these up into 1/4-inch pieces. To a dry pan on medium-low, I'll add our pork fat and let that slowly render, allowing it to essentially fry in its own fat. And this will take anywhere between 10 to 12 minutes. Now at the end, I'll crank up the heat to medium-high and cook for another minute or two to get the Tieu Mi to turn a golden brown color. We'll pull the pork fat and place on a plate with a paper towel to absorb some of the excess oil. And we'll season that with a pinch of salt and put that to the side. Now I am gonna reserve some of the pork lard to saute our ground pork and quail eggs in, and you can safely discard the rest of the oil. Now to a clean pan on medium-high, we'll add a couple tablespoons of the pork lard, drop in a tablespoon of minced garlic, and saute until fragrant. We'll add in about a pound of ground pork, then using a spatula, break up all that pork so that there are no big clumps. We'll season this with a teaspoon of fish sauce, sugar, MSG, and some fresh ground black pepper. We'll get that all incorporated and cooked through, and then we'll remove the pork from the pan. I'm going to repeat this step with 2 cans of quail eggs that I've drained. So to that same pan, we'll add some pork lard, saute our minced garlic, drop in our quail eggs, and we'll season with all the same things. Now for the quail eggs, since they're already cooked through, this step should only take a couple of minutes. Then we'll move both the quail eggs and the ground pork to the side, and we'll get started on our shrimp. Now, you could treat the shrimp exactly the same way that we did the ground pork and quail eggs, but today we're gonna go super simple by just blanching them. First, we'll depup all of our shrimp by using a toothpick or skewer, stabbing it between the 4th and 5th abdominal segment, and just lifting that doo-doo out of there. Then we'll leave the shrimp shells on for now, and we'll just blanch them in some salted water for a couple of minutes to cook them through. We'll drain and rinse with cold water, and then I'm gonna peel the shrimp, and we won't need the heads for this recipe, so I'm just gonna put them aside and eat as a little snack later. Or you can take them off prior to cooking and save them to make a shrimp stock. We'll get all of our shrimp peeled, and then using a small knife, we'll just cut them in half. This will help stretch your dollar and give you the appearance of more shrimp. But if you're ballin', you can definitely just leave the shrimp whole. Now the last part of our prep is getting our herbs and veggies done. First, I have some green onions that I'll chop up to use as a garnish. And then I have some garlic chives that I'll cut up into 2-inch sections, and this will be cooked with our bean sprouts. Now to a pot of boiling water, we'll add a pinch of salt, drop in our bean sprouts, we'll add in some of our garlic chives and cook this for just about a minute. Then we'll drain, rinse with cold water to stop the cooking process. And then I'm gonna treat this simply by tossing it with a splash of oil and a pinch of salt. We'll get that all mixed up and put that to the side. Now, after an hour of simmering, I'm gonna remove the onion and daikon so that it doesn't get a chance to dissolve into the broth, which would produce a cloudier broth. Now, once we've removed that, I'll continue to let this simmer for another hour or so, or until the pork butt is cooked through and tender. We'll pull the pork butt out, wrap it in some plastic wrap to prevent it from drying out, and then I'll stick it in the fridge to cool down to make it easier to slice later. Now to season our broth, I'm gonna add in a 1-inch nub of rock sugar, 3 tablespoons of MSG, and 4 tablespoons of fish sauce. Now with everything, my recommendation is to season to taste, as taste is subjective, but just check out how light and clean that broth looks though. Now to make our sauce, we'll add in a splash of oil to a small sauce pot on medium-high. We'll saute some minced garlic for a minute or until fragrant. Then we'll pour in 3 tablespoons of low-sodium soy sauce, 3 tablespoons of oyster sauce, and then we'll pour in half a cup of our hoteo broth. Now, alternatively, if you didn't want to make the whole broth, you could substitute it with chicken broth instead, and I would just add in a tablespoon of sugar and fish sauce to balance it all out. We'll bring this up to a boil and just let that simmer for a couple of minutes and let that reduce slightly. Then the last thing we have to do is cook our noodles and then assemble our bowl. Today we're using these wide egg noodles, but you can use thin egg noodles, rice noodles, or a combination of both. And they take just about 30 seconds to cook in some boiling water. I like mine more on the al dente side, but you can cook these to your desired doneness. And then it's time to plate. First, we'll add in the egg noodles we just cooked. We'll top that with some of our bean sprouts and garlic chives. And then you can add as much or as little of anything you want to make the bowl completely yours, but we'll add in our sliced pork butt, some of our shrimp, the ground pork, and our quail eggs. Then we'll spoon over some of our sauce. And then to garnish, we'll top that with our tiep ma, fried shallots, and green onions. Serve this up with a side of soup, and just like that, you've made Tieu Mi Kho at home. As always, the full recipe and measurements are on my blog at feedthepudge.com. And if you've made it this far, let me know in the comment section, are you team soup or team dry? Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy.